But just in terms of body image, a lot of the women would use I feel fat as a way to describe negative emotion. So rather than saying I feel insecure, I feel self-conscious, I feel uncomfortable, it was I feel fat. That's one example of where we're starting to attach our appearance to our self-worth.
I'm Riley Reese. This is the Sofia Unfiltered Podcast, where we bring together thought leaders, wellness entrepreneurs, makers, and emerging health leaders. We're here to have raw, unfiltered conversations because sharing your stories has the power to change lives, help others heal, and transform the way we take care of ourselves. Here we go. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Sofia Unfiltered. I'm Riley Reese, and today we're talking to Gabrielle Fundaro. Gabrielle holds a PhD in human nutrition. She's a health coach and a former assistant professor of exercise science. And today, when we sit down with Gabrielle, we're going to be discussing body image and how coaching to lose weight might be doing more harm than good. Gabrielle, welcome to the show. We're thrilled to have you today. Could you please just start and share a little bit to our listeners who don't know you yet, a little bit about yourself?
For sure. Yeah. So I'm kind of known on the Instagram platform as Vitamin PhD. And I spent many years actually speaking about gut health because for my PhD, I was studying the role of the gut microbiome in human metabolism. But before that, I was focusing more on exercise science. And that's what I ended up teaching too. So as an assistant professor, I was teaching a lot of sport nutrition, anatomy, and physiology. And I found myself resigning from higher ed after about 4 years and going into coaching full time because I had been doing both part-time for my final year of teaching and it wasn't sustainable. And I found that coaching was much more fulfilling and aligned with my values. And I've always been, well, I shouldn't say always, for over half of my life, I've been passionate about the gym and just being physically active and, nutrition and so on. But my relationship with training and nutrition and my body has changed so much since I started. I started at 18, 19 and, counting every macro and whatnot and hitting the gym every day. That's not how I operate anymore.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, that's a lot, right? But 18 years old counting macros.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this may be resonating with so many people right now, but can you just walk us back to those teen years and tell us a little bit about what happened, what sparked this?
I started tracking macros at 18 because I thought that at the time I was going to either own a gym and or be a personal trainer. And I thought surely no one is going to take me seriously if I don't look the part. So I need to be as muscular as possible, as lean as possible, and maintain this year round. And I need to follow a strict diet. It's like I have to, walk the walk. And that very quickly evolved into a full eating disorder. So I had that for a few years before I was diagnosed, which at the time, the eating disorder was called eating disorder not otherwise specified when it doesn't fit cleanly into one of the three main clinical eating disorders because I had a collection of different symptoms. And I managed that pretty well. I'm in terms of recovering over, the subsequent years, but I didn't realize that a lot of what I was trying to do to even celebrate the function of my body was still rooted in those body image issues and in how I thought a body was supposed to look and function. And so I continued tracking macros constantly. I mean, I really never took time off, probably until my early 30s.
Wow.
So over a decade. And the thought of moving away from macro tracking was so frightening because there was always this threat of losing my physique. And fast forward to this time in my life, I was an international speaker, and I still was struggling with showing up in my body and wondering whether people were going to take me seriously because I wasn't, the leanest person on stage. And it wasn't until the last few years where I was actually able to fully move away from macro tracking and be completely guided by internal cues and actually heal my body in a real way.
Yeah, and so many listeners again may be resonating with this, but when you when you had this and it started, I mean, I just want to circle back, right, for the eating disorder. So, what made you have that realization that you needed to get help? Was there a moment where you're like, okay, I need to be seen for this? Because I feel like this has really set the trajectory of you really honing in on the education and our bodies, and all of the things, right? Educationally, you're a health coach, you've been, in the gym, you've been doing all the work, but so I feel like it's really set the ground, set the path for you. So what was the
Yeah,
moment
yeah.
you decided to get help?
I was starting to have some physical symptoms from the ways that I was controlling my body weight. I don't want to go too far in depth and, because it could be very triggering. But once I started seeing physical symptoms, that's when I thought, okay, I think something is really wrong. And it was more out of concern for my health rather than realizing that it was from having an eating disorder.
So you still maybe
Yeah.
didn't know at this point. So you
Yeah.
had physical
Yep.
symptoms and went in, and that's when it kind of all came together. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
So
Exactly. Yeah.
just in case any of our listeners may be going through the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. And it's difficult, especially because a lot of fitness professionals and professionals within the health and wellness industries either don't recognize that they may be having disordered eating patterns. So it's sort of this subclinical orange zone where if you go, untreated for long enough, that you will develop a clinical eating disorder. Or they're very unlikely to seek support because there's a sense of shame and we all kind of think we're the only ones going through that, but that's actually not the case. And on top of that, a lot of professionals in the health and wellness industries have a fairly high level of internalized weight stigma that leads to the normalization of some of these disordered eating behaviors and the sort of preoccupation with weight loss and weight control. So those can all contribute and sort of create a fertile ground for the development of disordered eating patterns, and either not recognizing them, or feeling really self-conscious, and even not recognizing them in clients.
Oh, wow. Really great show. Really, really looking forward to diving into this. And so when you went in and you found out that you had the disordered eating, what came from that? So you healed, like, I'm going to go to school, I'm going to learn how to control this. Like, what really happened from there?
Oh gosh, yeah, I focused a lot. I went to therapy, and I advocate like therapy is one of the best things that I think most people can do for themselves. And I focused a lot on other contributing factors. So here's where the delineation between therapy and coaching can actually be a little bit of a disadvantage, because I think my therapist at the time didn't have a strong understanding of nutrition and physical activity and body image. And so they were able to address a lot of the contributing factors. And it was still immensely helpful. But in the same way that a coach can't cover things like
Mental health.
dialectical behavior therapy. Yes, exactly. And so I didn't have both of those at the same time. I was
So you were looking for the holistic, right? So you were looking for, or maybe it's never going to be in the same realms, right? But you were like, how do they kind of work together to help me holistically? Right. I've got the mental health on one side and the physical health on another, but I need this to work in balance.
Yeah. And I didn't realize that at the time. And I was frustrated and so discouraged and really ashamed that despite all of my work with the therapist, and despite what I knew then about disordered eating, I wasn't able to break that cycle within myself. And it really wasn't until I started to myself learn more about the relationships between body dissatisfaction and what body image really is, and how our pursuit of thinness is driven, when it's driven by that, which is often is, that is a sort of a self-perpetuating cycle, because my appearance was so tied to my self-worth and what I thought my value was, that it wasn't safe for me to potentially gain weight in the process of moving away from macros. So my eating disorder felt like a safe place. And I think that probably people can relate to that.
Absolutely.
Even though, it's harming you at some point, but it still feels safer than the alternative. And so that's why I was stuck for a very, very long time.
Okay. And now you also mentioned that, you were a coach and you were also helping people through some of these. So you went through this And then we hear this probably 9 times out of 10 practitioners have gone through the issues and then they turn around and start helping other people. They're like, hey, I went through this. I had to live it, learn it, and now I'm going to help other people and teach them. Right. So it sounds like the same thing happened and you were helping. Now you're a coach and now you're helping people with weight loss.
Yes, but I wasn't always helping people with their body image issues. I thought that I would.
Yes, so exactly. I want to unpack this. So for anybody listening who's like, hey, I'm here to lose weight, I'm going to do coaching, this probably might not be the issue is what you're saying.
Yeah. So when I started coaching, I was a macros-based weight loss coach. The vast majority of my clients were women that didn't like their bodies, and that also reflected on their relationship with themselves, what they thought about themselves as people. And we all thought that the obvious solution then was weight loss. Let's transform your physique. You'll feel better about yourself. That looks like improving your body image. And I thought that I was helping people by doing that. But over the course of a few years, I started to see in my clients the emergence of these disordered eating patterns, and that we kept kind of coming back to the beginning. And I've never shamed my clients. I've always understood lapses are normal, weight fluctuations are normal. But I started to wonder, is there something to this? Because I was also discussing this trend with one of my best friends who at the time worked in another coaching company. And both were saying like, yeah, I think that they need more than macros. They keep coming to us asking for a new macro plan. But, what do you do when they don't stick to it? And at the time, the rhetoric was, well, they're not, motivated enough. You have to want it bad enough. And we both just knew that that was not the answer. We knew that was an oversimplification, and that
Yeah. Can you just elaborate a little bit more? Like, what was the rhetoric? Like, what were people saying? Like, what were they coming back to you constantly? And you're like, when you put this realization together, just for any of our listeners who may be like, hey, I'm the person who keeps asking for new macro plans and I keep going to different weight loss coaches. Like, what does that look like from the customer side?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I want to preface this by saying like macro tracking isn't inherently disordered or harmful, but there are certain cues that will let you know that it's becoming harmful for someone. So if they're following it as though it's a rule. So I had a lot of clients that felt like they felt guilty for not tracking 100%. Well, they felt guilty for, going out to an event or something, and they didn't know, how they were going to track their meals there. Or if it's compulsory or compensatory. So something that they felt like they had to do, they felt anxious if they didn't do it. And then if they went without tracking for a little while, they wanted an even stricter plan. So those are some of the things that are specific to macros. But just in terms of body image, a lot of the women would use I feel fat as a way to describe negative emotion. So rather than saying I feel insecure, I feel self-conscious, I feel uncomfortable, it was I feel fat. That's one example of where we're starting to attach our appearance to our self-worth. And also saying things about how they felt disgusted with themselves, they hated parts of their bodies, a lot of unhelpful self-criticism and negative self-talk. And that when they had a fluctuation or they regained the weight, it wasn't just a normal physiological response to weight loss, which is what it is. They felt that it was a reflection of a moral failing. Like they had done something wrong, and they felt like they had done all the right things, and they were confused as to why they were regaining weight. And I think the moment I can remember this distinctly that I really realized, something is going wrong here, and I can't contribute to this anymore. Is that I had a client who I talked about an eating experience that they had, and I said, "Oh, I know where that's coming from. That sounds very familiar. Like I have been there in the days of my disordered eating." And when I expressed my concerns to the client, they became really defensive, and I didn't really know how to bring it up at the time. And when I started to bring it up to peers, there was also a defensiveness there as well. And I was like, okay, people are being very protective of these behaviors and unwilling to recognize the potential harm or risk. And that's another red flag. when you say like, hey, it seems like, tracking macros all the time is really stressing you out, and someone gets defensive, that's a sign that they have a fear over not using macros. So all of those were just, and that was with so many clients and, my own experiences and peers. And there was just so much evidence, even though it was just anecdotal at that time, that I was not contributing to their well-being in the way that I thought that I would.
Yeah, that must have been, disheartening. It must have, when that realization set in, when your peers where everybody's just kind of like sweeping it under the rug. I mean, it must have been a little bit disheartening, as a practitioner who's teaching people, right?
Oh yeah. I had a whole crisis. I had a whole identity crisis.
Right. Yeah. This was your whole business. Yeah. This was your whole life. Yes. And you're like, you know what? I've actually personally been through this and I'm not supporting this. I mean, I can't even imagine. Like, you must have felt like all of these years, all of the help, and we were all doing it wrong kind of thing.
Oh yeah. And I lost connections. I lost friends in the industry because when I started speaking about this, it was probably 5 years ago now, people weren't really aware of the body image issues that most of their clients were struggling with, and they weren't aware of the fact that they were contributing to it. And so when my friend Shannon and I started writing and speaking about this, we received actual hate mail. Because people were unhappy with the fact that we were pointing out the risks of one of their main sales
sources of some source of income.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Because it was like, well, if I'm not going to coach macros, like, what am I going to coach? And they would say things like, well, you're not, you're talking about therapy. You're not talking about coaching, or, this is just personal to you and you're just projecting onto people. And people really didn't take seriously what we were speaking and writing about, even though we came with evidence. Once we had the anecdote, we were like, let's go see what the research has to say about this. And it took a while, probably a solid year before people were actually listening and wanted to be involved and change the way that they were coaching.
And this still has nothing to do, and like you mentioned before, just because you track macros does not mean that there's something behind this with the body image issue, right? It's just, right. a way you're going to eat. And so I think that what you're bringing up beautifully is really taking a holistic approach to making sure somebody's getting the help that they need, right? So again, going back to the Sofia platform, it's like, how do you, even with what you went through, how do you make sure you're handling the mental health components? And as a coach, how do you make sure your clients are getting that support that they need in that department? And then you can handle your lane, right? Everybody has a lane, but they have to work together for clients. Yeah. So you basically, to me, it sounds like you were trying to say, hey, if your client has the mental component, that they need the actual right help, not, hey, maybe you're just doing this all wrong. It's just, maybe you need to find that other mental health professional that they need to work with, because just getting somebody to lose weight, if they have another sub issue, is really not helping. Mm-hmm. And it can be compounding, making the situation even worse.
Exactly. And even if the coach is not able to provide that specific type of support because it's outside of their scope, just being able to recognize the signs is really important, because then you can at least be aware, okay, this client has some predisposing factors that could put them at risk of developing disordered eating if we were to use macros in pursuit of cosmetic fat loss. Because really what we're looking at is not just any one component on its own.
Right.
It is the accumulation of these risk factors. And if we can recognize that, we can either help clients to not progress in that direction, or we can say, hey, this is going to be outside of my scope. And
exactly. Like, bring somebody else in. Exactly. Bring somebody else in. I think that is so smart. And it honestly, I know you got a lot of hate mail, but it's almost like saying, hey, you have a broken bone. You can't put a Band-Aid on that. You actually just need to go fix the broken bone. And then we're going to get back to fixing, everything else and making that joint stronger, the bone stronger, the arm stronger, like whatever it is. But you can't make the arm stronger if you got a fundamentally fractured arm, right? So just, terrible analogy here, but hopefully I see what you were saying. And I think that just makes sense. It's really hard, I guess, in the industry, and, but thank you for being willing to stand up and just say, hey, you guys might need a little extra help here, and that's not our lane, and find some care, and then come back, and then we'll work on all the rest of this. Right.
Right. Yeah. And to not contribute to it. even unknowingly. And
Yeah,
I believe, most coaches want to help people. And
absolutely.
yeah, so it's like when your client says, "Oh, I feel better now," then the logical assumption is, "Oh, they feel better now that they've lost weight. They feel more confident now that they've lost weight. So I helped them feel better, and weight loss is the thing that helps them feel better." And we can dive into all of the sort of misconceptions and the ways that we can actually cause harm or perpetuate harm unwittingly, which is the same thing that I was doing. So I don't say it with any blame. I just say it with a newfound awareness.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so, do you think this just comes back to diet culture, right? As a whole, is that what's going
Oh
on?
gosh,
Is it social
yeah,
media? I mean, what's going on?
it certainly contributes. Yeah. And in the U.S. specifically, and the U.S. influences so many other countries in terms of like pop culture. We've been tracking macros and moralizing body size for a little over 100 years now. It started during World War I food conservation efforts, where there was a lot of propaganda around hoarding food in the shape of body fat, because it was a really an interesting intersection where we had social, political, global changes and events that intersected with advancements in nutritional science. So this was the first time that the general public understood the concept of energy balance. So at least in the U.S. and likely in other places, because the U.S. really has a large influence on pop culture in other countries. We have been counting calories and macros and moralizing body size for a little over 100 years. So this started during World War I, when we had a really interesting intersection of global sociopolitical events and advancements in nutritional science. This was the first time that the general public understood the concept of energy balance, and that excess energy is stored in the form of body fat. And at the same time, the government was producing a lot of propaganda around food conservation, because they wanted to send certain foods to the Allied troops. And it was seen as your civic duty to conserve food and to eat less. And so they had very stigmatizing content that they were putting out to encourage people to conserve food and eat less. And that's really when we started to see a stigmatization of large bodies, rather than recognizing them as a sign of abundance and wealth and status. And that was sustained even through the Great Depression, because people in the highest socioeconomic statuses were actually pretty untouched by the effects of the Depression. And for them, in kind of the same way that like now we exercise to look fit, but people who are laborers will naturally look that way because of their lifestyle, dieting to lose weight was a way to show that you had a freedom from want, essentially, and you could be thin and just for fun, essentially. So it still became that was when the thin ideal emerged, and it has been sustained since then. And so when we look at a person with a large body, there are so many negative beliefs that are held about that person. And we equate someone's body size and appearance with their character. And that's weight stigma, essentially, when we have negative beliefs about someone based on their body size, and weight bias when we treat them negatively because of those beliefs.
Don't you think that's changing, right, with Gen Z? And I mean, I just feel like there's been a shift and an acceptance. I could be wrong, right? But do you see this changing?
I do. And especially in just the last few years, I think that's been, I've seen conversations changing in the industry, especially. I don't get hate mail anymore, thank goodness. And I'm invited to speak about these topics, and people are on the same page, and coaches are changing the services that they provide. The difficulty is now we're in this transition period where this is still the minority, for the most part, physical transformation sells, and people feel good about themselves when they're in smaller bodies, and they don't realize the extent of their internalized weight stigma. And so, there are definitely coaches that want to do things differently, but they either aren't quite sure how, because they don't know how else to help clients change, or they don't know how to market those different services. Because if we're not going to use before and afters, how do I show the internal transformation that someone has experienced? Like you can't take a picture of someone who's more fulfilled. You can't show that. And so there are still many obstacles to actually implementing this on a larger scale. And, we see this not just in coaching, but, in the medical community as well. I think the other issue is that there's this debate about, whether or not body size is a choice, whether it's a moral issue. I think that distracts people from actually trying to find the most effective ways to help a person who wants help, and not to stigmatize the people who don't want help. Not everyone feels compelled to change their bodies, and shaming them is not an effective motivator. So we have so many of these discussions going on, and I think it is just, it kind of distracts us from determining, okay, like whether or not we assume that obesity is a disease. I mean, that was established in, I want to say, the early 2000s, and that had many downstream effects, in terms of how we perceive it. But whether or not we perceive that as a disease, what's the most effective way we can help a person who wants to be helped? That is I think the most important question. And so when a person wants to improve their health, a lot of times people will turn towards intentional weight loss. And it is true that weight loss can improve cardiometabolic health in certain cases. The only thing is we don't necessarily have to track the weight loss. That's the only difference between like a weight neutral and a weight focused approach, just as one example. So like there's so much debate about, whether weight loss helps, and the evidence suggests yes, that it does. The potential harm comes in when we make weight loss the focus, and that's the outcome that we're aiming for, rather than making the behaviors the focus, and the behaviors are the outcome that we're aiming.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. What do you think all of the drugs on the market now have done to the industry? Or is it too soon to say, with all the Ozempics and...
Mm-hmm. It's so polarizing. And I think we need more time to determine what the long-term effects are before we can say that with any level of certainty.
I mean, because it's really transformational and it's really helping people.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I say, even though I don't coach cosmetic fat loss, I still support bodily autonomy, and I support people who want to change their bodies, and I want them to be able to do that in the safest way possible. Mm-hmm. Now, if we're talking about intentional weight loss that is purely driven by a person's pursuit of health, then they are probably at less risk of developing disordered eating than someone who is pursuing it because of body dissatisfaction and like trying to like their bodies more. And if that is a helpful tool for them and the potential benefits outweigh the potential risks, well, that's an adult, and they can make those decisions as long as it's informed. So I really try to be quite anti-dogmatic about whatever approach someone wants to use. And that's why I'm not anti-macros. I'm not anti-intentional weight loss. I just find that when it comes to cosmetic fat loss, and when I say that, I mean fat loss intended for a subjective improvement in someone's physique so that they like the appearance of their body more. That is almost always driven by body dissatisfaction. And it's one of the strongest risk factors for developing disordered eating. And then when we add macro tracking onto that, then we're adding another potential risk factor. And when we do things like before and after photos and we're tracking body weight, we're increasing the preoccupation with their appearance. And all of those things cause harm. For what potential benefit? Well, the person might feel better about themselves at the end. But here's what I say about this type of cosmetic fat loss. Changing your body does not inherently improve your body image. It makes your body less triggering to you. The fact that you like your body more doesn't necessarily mean that you have a more flexible or neutral body image, which is really what's connected to positive body image, where we're not so attached to how we look and we can allow our bodies to change over time. And our appearance and the scale don't determine our worth and value. So the fact that someone feels better at the end is a little bit misleading for both clients and coaches, because you think, well, my client says that they feel better. They say that they don't like what they see in the mirror, or that it doesn't reflect who they really are. And that comes back to those beliefs rooted in weight stigma, that I don't like a large body in the mirror because I think a large body belongs to someone who's a worse person. I think I'm better than that. I treat myself better than that. Like I take care of my body and I care. So I should be in a smaller body because smaller bodies are better. And so that's why I don't coach cosmetic fat loss anymore, because I don't want to contribute to those beliefs and patterns.
So, Gabrielle, I mean, for any of our listeners that, this they may be identifying with this, or, they may have just had that realization that, there might be something underneath the surface. What do you recommend in that case? Is it more of the mental health side?
Yeah. If it's accessible, absolutely, to have support from a mental health professional. If not, there is evidence that like the DIY self-help approach can also help to improve body image, but it really needs to be done in a weight neutral framework. This is another challenge that's going on right now, is that there are a lot of coaches and influencers that are selling body image improvement, but it's actually weight loss. And whether or not they know, they're actually contributing to, potentially worse body image. That's also muddying the waters, because clients are thinking and they're hopeful that they can improve their body image at the same time that they're intentionally losing weight. And really, when you look at what drives body dissatisfaction, it is things like body checking. So like weighing yourself, checking the mirror frequently, controlling your body size and food intake. So even when we focus on the process, because sometimes people say, well, we don't need to focus on weight as the outcome. We could focus on the process instead, even though we know that, physique change is the outcome. If a person's self-worth becomes tied to the behaviors that lead them to controlling their body size and body weight, that's just another side of the same coin. So it still comes down to their ability to control their body size.
And I think it still all comes down to what are people saying on social media, and what are you selling and what are you actually buying, which is, actually terrifying, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Because it's hard unless you really know and understand what body image actually is. It feels like positive body image is liking the way that I look. And it's actually not. Positive body image is about being fairly detached from how you look. You can still, enjoy your clothing, and, you want to feel comfortable in your clothing. You want to, have positive or neutral thoughts about your body. But conditionally liking the way that your body looks is not the same thing, because once you regain the weight, you will once again trigger that negative body image. And that's, I think, where a lot of people end up, is they keep fluctuating back and forth. And it's not just, we look at the surface level, like, oh, it's hard to maintain the habit of, that sustain a lower body weight. Well, why is that? Because a lot of times our motives are coming from a place of body dissatisfaction. It's not something that's actually aligned with our values. And the only reason it's important to us is because it's coming from a place of fear and threat.
Yeah, that deep-rooted issue that needs to be worked through before we get to anything else. Yeah, that makes sense. And it is a very complex issue. And hopefully that our listeners, if you're listening to the show and you have any questions, obviously you can reach out to Gabrielle. We'll share her information in the show notes. But also because it's like, where do you go to get help? And then what's the right place to get help, and how do you know what you're doing is going to work? And we just want our listeners, whoever's listening right now, to be empowered to say, if you're working with a coach or you're working with a practitioner, really look at what they're offering and see if it's working for you and your plan.
Yeah, 1,000%. And what I usually recommend, if my clients are able to, is to work with a therapist and me at the same time, provided that they don't have, an active eating disorder. But that way they get, both aspects. And fortunately, there's some more crossover now, and there are mental health professionals who are licensed that are very knowledgeable around eating disorders and subclinical disorder eating. And there are coaches that are receiving a lot more education around body image and weight neutral approaches. So I would say, if you are looking for someone to work with in terms of coaching in that vein, be aware of those red flags of someone saying, well, you can lose weight and improve your body image at the same time, like intentionally lose weight and improve your body image at the same time. folks that are trying to sell something like intuitive eating for fat loss, because intuitive eating is a weight neutral approach. Those are signs that they're trying to take something that's trendy and still use it for physique change, which is not really, that's not the intention. And body image work is more effective, and maybe only effective when it's done within a weight neutral framework. I think when you're utilizing that within intentional weight loss, it might be protective. But if a person's already coming to you with severe body image disturbance, putting them on a diet to lose weight so they like their body more is doing harm.
Yeah, I appreciate this for all of our listeners who may be out there, they're getting this help or getting this coaching. And we just hope that you're more empowered to take control of your health and actually start asking questions to the practitioners and to the coaches that you're working with. And for all the coaches, it's amazing that we have so many people crossing these boundaries, and the mental health professionals have all this information. That's incredible. And for the health professionals out there, hopefully you've built your team of different professionals that you can work with and refer your clients out to, or patients if they're your patients, or clients if they're your clients. So yeah, I think that's incredible, and all in the name of getting the clients to live their best, healthiest life, right? And get them the help that they need. I think that's what we're all out here trying to do every single day. Gabrielle, thank you for being here with us on the show. Before you go, so there's a question that we ask all of our guests. If you could share 3 fundamental pillars that contribute to your well-being.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would say therapy. and even, like I mentioned, like the self-help kind, like the ability to understand myself and learn more continuously. My ability to trust myself, my internal cues, because that has been really pivotal in moving away from feeling controlled by macros, and social support. So that's one of the most important things, like having people that I can talk to during times of need.
No, thank you for that. And then also, where can our listeners connect with you, and then how can they find out more information? I know you left them an amazing discount. So can you give us a little bit of information on that?
Yeah. So the best place to find me would be on Instagram at Vitamin PhD, because my link tree has links to everything. I do have a website, but it's a Kajabi site, and I don't have a great website name yet.
I think you're going to need Sofia Health. I think you're going to
I
think you're going to need to be on the Sofia platform.
And yeah, I'm putting on a course called RP Eating. So it's an internally regulated way of eating that's derived from RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, and the concept of autoregulation, which is really common in training. It's kind of like, you can tell when you have 1 rep left in the tank. You can tell what your levels of hunger and fullness are. And over time, you can discern between that and things like appetite or a craving. And there are also core skills to RP eating that are there to support your body image and your relationship with food. It's aimed toward coaches. I'm sure non-coaches would also find it really helpful, because it's all about moving away from macros. And I'm giving everyone a 10% discount on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've sent you, I think, the links and everything. So that is a self-paced course. So fortunately, you can invest in that at any point in time that feels right to you.
Yeah, that's incredible, Gabrielle. So thank you. And it's truly amazing that you're helping people and not just funneling people into that same, weight loss spiral that could be actually causing, more harm. And, hopefully a lot of coaches are gravitating and listening to the education. I think as long as everything is rooted in education, it makes a really big difference. There's so much stuff out there, but thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and everything that you're doing in the industry.
I'm so glad that I got the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening. This has been Sofia Unfiltered, a podcast by Sofia Health, the #1 marketplace for health and wellness. Find services, classes, and products from the top health and wellness providers. Book an appointment or join live classes now. I'm your host, Riley Reese. If this episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear about it in the comments section of your favorite podcast provider, or with a 5-star rating. Let us know what your biggest takeaway from this episode was, or share it with someone you hope to inspire. Join us again next time for more real conversations, stories, and insights that help empower you with the knowledge and inspiration needed to transform how we care for ourselves.